something doesn't add up, and the moment it cracked open, it didn't come from a courtroom, a statement, or even a confrontation. It came from a tennis court under the summer sun, where Catherine, Princess of Wales, unknowingly detonated a narrative that had been carefully constructed for months, maybe years, and suddenly, Prince Harry's entire security argument began to look less like a desperate plea and more like a calculated move spiraling out of control. Because just days before this seemingly harmless Wimbledon appearance, a bombshell had already been planted. A classified-style security dossier, packed with chilling claims of terror plots, stalkers, and imminent threats, didn't quietly land in the hands of officials. It exploded into the media. And not randomly. No, it was delivered with precision, handed directly to a media outlet known for aligning closely with the Sussex narrative. That alone raises a question no one can ignore. Was this really about safety, or was this about pressure? The contents were designed to shock. Claims of 6 active terror plots, allegations involving Al-Qaeda, missing individuals with supposed links to threats, the kind of information that doesn't just inform, it alarms. But here's where the story twists. This wasn't an independent intelligence report from MI5 or Scotland Yard. This was commissioned, paid for, built by a private security firm funded directly by Prince Harry himself. And suddenly, the tone changes. Because now it's not just a warning, it's advocacy. And the timing? That's where it gets even more suspicious. The dossier surfaces just as plans for a UK visit involving Meghan Markle, Archie, and Lilibet are being discussed. Coincidence? Or a perfectly timed move to force a reaction? Because the message hidden between the lines was unmistakable if anything happens. Responsibility falls on the British state, a public ultimatum wrapped in fear. But then, something unexpected happens. While this storm is building, while headlines scream about danger and risk, Catherine, Princess of Wales, quietly steps onto court 18 at Wimbledon. Not hidden, not shielded behind layers of visible protection. She sits among ordinary spectators, laughing, engaged, present no panic, no visible fear, just calm, controlled confidence. And that image, simple as it looked, became a contradiction too loud to ignore, because suddenly 2 narratives were colliding in real time. On one side, Prince Harry presenting a reality where stepping onto British soil is a near impossible risk without state-level protection. On the other, Catherine, Princess of Wales, arguably one of the most high-profile figures in the world, sitting within arm's reach of the public, trusting a system that works without spectacle. And people noticed. They noticed the absence of chaos, the absence of visible anxiety. They noticed that her security, while undoubtedly present, was discreet, controlled, almost invisible. That's how it's designed to be. Not a fortress, not a performance. A system built on precision, not panic. And in that moment, without saying a single word, Catherine, Princess of Wales, delivered a statement more powerful than any official rebuttal. So now the question shifts. If the threat is as overwhelming as described, how does this moment exist? How does one royal move freely while another claims it's nearly impossible? Is it about different risk levels or different approaches? And then the deeper layers begin to surface, because insiders and analysts quickly started drawing a line between the dossier's intent and its structure. This wasn't neutral. It was persuasive, designed to reach a conclusion before the evidence even fully unfolds. The goal wasn't just to highlight danger, it was to justify a demand. Permanent, state-funded protection, not just in the UK, but globally. A privilege reserved for a select few, extended for life. And suddenly, the stakes become clear. This isn't about one visit, it's about status, about securing a level of protection that follows everywhere from California to Colombia to Nigeria, funded not privately, but publicly. And that changes everything, because now the British taxpayer becomes part of the story, the silent party being asked to carry the weight of a decision shaped far beyond their control. But there's another layer no one can ignore. The dossier leans heavily on threats linked to Prince Harry's military past, particularly his time in Afghanistan. Real risks, yes, but risks that, according to critics, were intensified, not reduced by one very public decision. The release of his book, Spare, a moment where private military experiences became global headlines. Specific numbers, specific actions. And suddenly, what was once confidential became public knowledge. Security experts didn't stay quiet about that, because in their eyes, that shift transformed the nature of the threat itself. It turned a symbolic target into a personal one. It provided context, motivation, and visibility. And now, those same threats are being used as justification for an upgraded security status. A loop that feels too convenient. And while all of this unfolds, the silence from Buckingham Palace becomes its own kind of statement. No direct direct confrontation. No emotional response, just protocol, just distance, letting the system speak instead of stepping into the storm. But silence in moments like this feels loud because behind it lies something deeper, a growing divide, not just between narratives, but between philosophies. One rooted in duty, visibility, and trust, the other wrapped in fear, exposure, and control of the narrative itself. And just when it seemed like the narrative couldn't grow more complicated, the psychological layer began to surface, quietly at first, then with increasing intensity, revealing a pattern that many had overlooked but now felt impossible to ignore, because what we were witnessing was no longer just a dispute over security, it was a transformation in perception itself. The shift in Prince Harry from a once widely admired figure into someone increasingly defined by suspicion, fear, and confrontation had been gradual but unmistakable. Observers began connecting moments, interviews, statements, and appearances, noticing how the language of threat and danger had become central, almost foundational to the narrative being presented. And then the spotlight turned toward Meghan Markle, not as a side character, but as a significant force shaping that perspective. In multiple public appearances, particularly the Netflix series and the Oprah Winfrey interview, Meghan Markle reinforced the sense of vulnerability, drawing repeated parallels to Princess Diana and the dangers of public life. But critics began questioning whether these comparisons were protective or amplifying, because instead of calming the storm, the narrative seemed to intensify it, feeding into a cycle where every criticism became evidence of danger, every lens a potential threat. And once that mindset takes hold, everything starts to look like confirmation. That's where the leak begins to feel less like an isolated act and more like the logical outcome of a growing belief system. Because if Prince Harry genuinely sees the system as hostile, as something working against him, then exposing it becomes, in that mindset, not reckless, but necessary. And yet to those on the outside, especially within the structures of British security, it reads very differently. It reads as escalation, as an attempt to force a decision not through protocol, but through pressure. And at the center of that system sits RAVEC, a body deliberately designed to operate away from public influence, relying on evidence, intelligence, and measured judgment. It doesn't respond to headlines. It doesn't bend under emotional appeal. And that is precisely where the conflict sharpens, because Prince Harry isn't asking for case-by-case evaluation. He's asking for restoration. Automatic, permanent, all-encompassing protection. The kind that follows everywhere, without question, without pause. A status that once granted becomes almost impossible to revoke. But here's where the narrative begins to fracture under scrutiny. Because within the dossier itself, analysts began identifying inconsistencies, claims that stretched beyond verified intelligence, incidents framed in ways that exaggerated their severity, even references to individuals that upon investigation were found to be harmless, loyal fans rather than credible threats. And then there were the broader claims, far-right extremism, widespread targeting elements that, according to experts familiar with royal security dynamics, didn't align logically with the actual risk landscape, because many of those groups, by their own ideology, would view Prince Harry not as a target, but as irrelevant. So what does that mean? It means the threat picture may not be entirely organic. It may be shaped, curated, expanded to support a conclusion already decided. And if that's true, then the implications stretch far beyond one individual case, because it sets a precedent, a dangerous one, where influence, wealth, and media leverage can be used to pressure the state into providing protection, not based purely on risk, but on narrative strength. And as this realization settles in, the atmosphere within the United Kingdom begins to shift. Patience starts to thin. What was once seen as a personal struggle now begins to feel like a public burden, a spectacle, a reality where national security procedures are being pulled into the spotlight, dissected, questioned, and potentially compromised for the sake of a single outcome. But perhaps the most devastating consequence isn't institutional, it's personal. Because behind all of this, behind the documents, the leaks, the headlines, lies a fracture within a family that appears to be reaching a point of no return. The suggestion that King Charles and Prince William are somehow involved in denying protection doesn't just challenge policy, it challenges trust. It introduces an accusation that cuts deeper than any public disagreement, especially at a time when King Charles Wales is already navigating his own vulnerabilities. In Buckingham Palace, it doesn't react, it doesn't engage, it holds its position, quietly reinforcing the boundary that security decisions lie with the Home Office, not the monarchy. But that silence carries weight. It suggests distance, finality, a refusal to be drawn into a battle that is being fought on entirely different terms. And so the story circles back to where it began, with a single, quiet moment on a tennis court that said more than any statement ever could. Catherine, Princess of Wales, didn't confront the narrative, she contradicted it by existing within it, calmly, confidently, without fear. Which leaves one final, unsettling question hanging in the air: if the danger is real, why does it look so different depending on who is telling the story and who is simply living it?